the problem with the Google glasses is that people walking down the street kept walking into fence posts.
Yeah.
Because the problem was it was an interface on top of your vision instead of integrating into your vision.
When you're designing a logic, it's super important to make sure it's a really solid foundational logic. We're designing backend system. If you rely too much on AI, it's going to have a lot of flaws. I think just the amount that AI can help grow like an entire economy is going to be revolutionary in that sense.
But if you're someone who's just coming in and saying like, oh, I'm just going to let the AI do all of it and I'm not going to learn, you're going to fall behind.
I think personally, like, okay, for internet, there's such a learning curve. But when it comes to AI, I guess there's not really a learning curve. You just go in ChatGPT.com and you can type in responses and you can get something back.
We're at that kind of stage with GPUs. It's just like, as advanced as they are, I don't think they're advanced enough for where we're going in like 10, 15 years.
So we're just talking about like the hype cycles with AI, right? And I think for young people and everyone alike, everyone's thinking about, okay, is this actually the new revolutionary technology that's going to change the world forever? Or is it just another hype cycle similar to dot-com bubble? I actually read an article recently that talks about like somebody who has lived through the dot-com bubble actually saw a lot of similarities between the dot-com bubble and the AI bubble. But I was just talking about like, but there's AI has in real utilities, whereas in dot-com, maybe there's not that much utilities. Just want to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, no, I do think, AI has so much utility. I think when we were first starting with artificial intelligence, when like ChatGPT 3 was out, and then like subsequently 3.5, at that time, it was kind of like in this bubble phase because it was just like it was just a toy essentially, right? You could just like say something back to you. There wasn't really logic behind it, things like that. Now, and we're seeing like, for example, even at my firm, we started implementing like our own version of a GPT, and just the level of AI adoption from our white collar companies and so much other has like really evolved. And that, I guess, in terms of like a parallel to the dot-com bubble, I still think the dot-com was like a very useful time because of the fact that if that much investment didn't go into the dot-com, I don't know how many websites could have been created. I think creating websites is one of the most revolutionary uses of the internet. And that kind of like changed a lot of how we did things. And one of the things I do think there will be a parallel of is in the same way when websites first started, there was so many and people didn't really know how to go through and navigate between a lot. And then it just got like centralized to like maybe like 5 or 6 websites that now today we use more than anything else. I think there will be a point in AI too where like it'll be 2 or 3 LLMs that become so much more ingrained. Like, I remember Sam Altman was talking about like for OpenAI, he hopes that children never have to like, they think of it as like an actual like not software, operating system, right? And this idea that like it remembers everything about you since you were a little kid. I think at that point there actually starts to become like network effects as well for an LLM. So I think that would be really interesting.
Yeah, I personally do see the value of like AI. Obviously, I think we talk about it on the pod quite often, right? But then, and it's in a lot of my daily workflows and also my company's workflows. But I also see there's a silent bubble that you cannot just like ignore. Windsurf got offered $3 billion by OpenAI. And Johnny Ive, the former chief designer of Apple, which basically designed the iPhone, he and his startup had a new device that he partnered up with OpenAI a year ago. So the company didn't exist a year ago, and now it just got bought for $6.8 billion by OpenAI. And none of us know what the hell is it. Like, is it going to be a flop, or is it going to be like a real thing? And who's going to buy it for that much? Is it like a sign of bubble, Matt, you think?
But I feel like one of the things here is that when you look at the dot-com companies, like a lot of them, like it was great for the internet and propagating the internet, but most internet, websites weren't that useful. Like, oh yeah, pets.com, like, yeah, that was pretty cool. You could pay online for the first time. Amazon, started before the dot-com bubble and propagated through it. But even it wasn't like as useful way back then as it is now. Whereas like the ease of like AI becoming very useful is more about like, how can you wrap it in a way that makes it useful, right? Like, I don't know, like myself, like having done like a lot of programming lately, I've come to realize that the majority of the world moving forward is going to be figuring out how to get the real world into the context of an LLM, right? There's going to be 2 types of people in the future, those that make LLMs smarter and those that teach them the world, right? Like, and so those that are creating wrappers like the question is this a bubble or not? And it depends on how far this propagates, right? Because if it continues to happen, like we might be just at the beginning of rappers wrapping different things for the world. Because let's be honest, like if you look at any of the models that exist today, they could be used for way more things, which means that we have not caught up to, like, AI is actually more capable than what it's actually being used for, which makes me feel like, okay, is this the end of a bubble or the start of a bubble? Because I feel like there's a lot more growth to go from there.
I think personally, like, okay, for internet, you need to have an adoption curve when you came from knowing nothing about the internet and getting a PC and actually using the internet, right? So there's such a learning curve. But when it comes to AI, I guess there's not really a learning curve. You just go in ChatGPT.com and you can type in responses and you can get something back from it, right? We're not even touching this sort of like infrastructure just yet, even like 2.5 years after. So like, do you agree, like, ads.com is like, there's like no value compared to where we are today with, let's say, ChatGPT and Claude back in the internet days?
Yeah, like I think the way I would also look at it, I do think there was still value in pets.com or just like any websites. It just like it revolutionized the idea that like you can do something with like this computer, or it's like laptops and things also weren't gonna like catch as much popularity. It propagated like a lot. It's like the entire industry that became technology, right? So I think there always was value for like any companies that started there. And you always go through A/B testing, right? Like with AI being created right now, like again, what we were just saying, it was really weak before when it first was like came out as popular and people was like playing around with it. And yeah, I do agree right now. I think it's like very strong in the sense that you can actually use it for like genuine tasks. And we haven't found the right, I guess, like form factor for it to become the most useful. It sounds like OpenAI is really trying to do that. And it makes sense, I think, right now because of the fact that the iPhone general, this handheld device has been so long used by everyone. It's become a daily part of our life. It makes sense that like there should be that next evolution. And whatever that becomes, I would assume that AI has to be the integral part in that.
There are many wearable startups that have failed spectacularly, like the Humane Ping and the others. Like, why do you think they're not successful compared to whatever Johnny Hive and Sam Altman's building?
I have no idea what they're building. So in that sense, I'm not sure. But I think the point is, with all these other like gadgets that come out, they always feel gimmicky. And I think even like the first phones were always gimmicky when they first started. It takes time for like up until the App Store got created, right? Like the iPhone didn't have as much like utility, right? I remember like I was listening to like a Steve Jobs like presentation on it. He was talking about the App Store being the radio. And, like the way he like visualized this was incredible. But if that App Store didn't get created, all of that value into the iPhone wasn't going to happen.
Well, I feel like with anything that's going to be used instead of a phone, it has to have a particular function that's going to be better than an app on a phone, right? And we've just never had an AI tool that's reached that. We've had other types of devices that are, relevant to that. Like an example is in crypto is hardware wallets, right? There's a reason that it's not just an app because it's more secure. And now we have hardware wallets now that are starting to have their own app stores. So then the question is like, what are they going to do with AI that's going to be that much more useful that you can't just get, with a phone app? And I don't really know what that could possibly be.
I think the most popular answer has always been like the glasses. Like everyone's just like, where's these like the Meta glasses, anything like that?
Google glasses.
Yeah. The problem with the Google glasses is that people walking down the street kept walking into fence posts.
Yeah.
Because the problem was it was an interface on top of your vision instead of integrating into your vision, like instead of it being like, oh, right here on the table, there is, something that I'm looking at. It's like, oh, it's like a screen in my face. Yeah. So I feel like that's so hard to do because our eyes react so quickly. Like AR is such a difficult thing to do.
So the new glasses, are they that different from Google Glass? Or are they just using a new approach? Like the Meta glasses, the Ray-Ban ones are pretty successful, I heard.
I would imagine though. I don't know, to be honest.
Okay.
I haven't looked at them.
Yeah.
I mean, my big problem is like always like for me, like I like have a very strong prescription. So if I'm going to get those, then it needs to work with my existing vision. And most of the time it doesn't. And I feel like that's also a big problem for all these, glass creation. Like 50% of people wear glasses, and have some type of prescription that's not going to be quite proper. Whereas a phone is so easy, like, because everyone can look at it at a distance, right?
Yeah. And I think like for AI, I think the adoption, I think we've been debating this, like the society has been debating for the past few years. But I really think what it comes down to is like coding. I think coding has really made a product market fit for the market. I'm not too sure if like rendering emails for you and all that stuff is like that much of a product differentiation. Whereas a coding, I think it's really tough.
Well, I feel like even for like writing emails, like what I've noticed myself doing is like building up context inside of ChatGPT or Gemini, and like now it knows about my contacts and knows about the people that I talk to, and like, oh hey, like bring up this contact from here and answer this. Oh, and here's this email, and I generally want to talk about these things, but I'm not sure how to word it. But word it in my tone and don't use dash dash so it doesn't seem like AI, right? So people are building like context around these things.
Yeah.
I feel like that's the same thing people are doing with coding. And what I've actually realized is that having things that are readable by an LLM has become so much more important. The other day we were working on like user flows in an app on Figma. And I literally said to my business partner, I was like, hey, like we need to get this in Mermaid, which is like a format that, is just like a text file. Yeah, I think that it creates the flow chart, right? So have what exists in Figma in the flows, but have it in code form that it's easier for AI to read that, because it can go and instead of you having to screenshot it, it can read that and then it can convert that into flows, and then it can look at your existing code and then it can merge the two, right? So having everything that you do in a format that is also available in code format is now become more important than ever.
So you're saying that like the AI is kind of like the nucleus in the situation, and that's like the center over like everything when you're in terms of however you're coding, whatever project you're doing.
I think Figma has done, so I was actually doing the same thing with Figma. I think Figma has done something that's really, like, I think it's a little bit like a glimpse of what's going to happen in the future. So Figma definitely has this like dev mode, right? But dev mode is for humans, it's not for AI agents. So it basically built this like new tool called Tunnel or something. But basically you open up a local host, which is like a local server on your computer that will show exactly the design details and code to your AI agent. So you actually launch that tunnel, and then you can feed this Figma design to your AI agent.
Oh my God, that's amazing. I'm going to have to use that, George.
So that's a new thing. I see the thing is slowly transition. So the future may be more about, okay, how can you build your app that's like readable by AI agents, right? And I think before I was like, okay, it's not quantifiable. I can't see myself. Like, what is this? How does it mean? And now I really saw it. It's like, okay, AI agents can actually do a lot of shit.
Yeah, it's like basically like everything that you experience on your computer should have the ability to basically right click and inspect elements no matter what the application is, so that you can navigate through everything. And that's the other thing I've noticed as well, is like for certain interfaces, like say if I'm using like Google Cloud or AWS, right? And me having to go and navigate through, okay, I want to set up this, this virtual machine, or I want to set up, this other thing. I have to go through all the different permissions. It's way faster for me to just ask the AI, hey, I want you to do this thing. It writes the CLI commands and then just runs them, right? So me doing any task, instead of me having to get familiar with an interface, I'm just talking to a bot that's going to run the commands in the background that's going to do it for me. So everything needs to be LLM accessible. And if it is, you're like 10 times faster.
Yeah, so I think just like the question is like, okay, are we in this hype cycle? Because like, are we in a hype cycle? Even though like Matt and I were saying, okay, there are those use cases that and I think specific for a code perspective, we find it really useful, right? For like email summary and stuff, I personally don't feel like it's game changing for me. Document summaries, not game changing. Coding, yes, that's the one thing that's like game changing. So do you think like we're in a hype cycle per se?
I don't think it's a hype cycle for sure. I have heard like a couple people like talk about like a doom cycle in the sense of like existing coders. So I think that's Armageddon for them in a sense, which I also don't agree with. I think just the amount that AI can help grow like an entire economy is going to be revolutionary in that sense. And I just don't think there can be a hype cycle in this sense because, and I remember reading this, it's this idea that like AI will be able to notice things that we miss for so much, right? For example, if somebody has like a PhD in like a very, very, very specific like physics topic, AI can take like context and put it into biology and like actually make that bridge, right? And if you can build enough of these bridges throughout the world with just people that are curious, the amount that we can build in like 10, 15 years, I don't think we should ever underestimate humanity in that sense. So
But I think where AI gets us is AI gets us 90% of the way there, right? If you tell AI, hey, build me an app that does X, Y, Z, it will get you most of the way there. But the other 10%, like that it gets wrong, like, oh, this is slightly out of place, or this wording is weird, or people are going to like not like, you know, what this flow looks like, right? Like humans are able to get the other 10% there, which I think is perfect because basically every human is able to get to that 90%. And then it's the 10% that's going to be important. So any task that's being done in the world can be done like 10x faster, but you still need humans to do that last 10%. And I just feel like the reason it's like people are saying it's Armageddon for software engineers is because at this very moment, like people aren't hiring as much because there haven't been the new companies that have come to fruition that are building that many more things that have adapted to like, oh, you only need to do that last 10%.
A thing I fear is like a lot of like human, including myself, become overly reliant on AI, right? And I think that's like it's a big issue moving forward. If you're relying on AI to do your tasks, then like, are you really any more good at of doing what you're doing? Because I see something like we talked about before, Matt, is like the harder before is the new easy. Right. And I'm just wondering, like, okay, if I'm overly relying on AI and us as a society overly relying on AI, we're going to let code that are bad ship through and there are going to be new vulnerabilities. And, you know,
but I feel like it depends on how you're doing it, right? Like before this, you just showed me, was it Claude Code AI? Is that what it's called? Claude Code, which like runs in your terminal, you spin it up. And you're like, hey, I want you to do XYZ task. And it just goes through and it does it. But it shows sometimes it shows the diffs of the different files, but you're not able to as easily, you know, go through and see where those files are to see where the diffs are, yes. Right? Whereas say if you're using Cursor and you're using Claude or you're using ChatGPT or you're using Gemini, well, it's going to show you in exactly what file something was happening in, and you're going to be able to click in and see how it was thinking for the last 10 seconds. Yeah. And so what I've found has occurred for me is I've been able to learn even about my own code base, you know, 5 or 10 times as fast and actually get context. But if you're someone who's just coming in and saying like, oh, I'm just going to let the AI do all of it and I'm not going to learn, then you're going to fall behind. I feel like the key thing is to become extremely proficient at the last 10%. If you're extremely proficient at the last 10%, and while the other 90% is being written and you're learning faster on that, then you're going to become like a 10x developer in no time. And what I've noticed as well is like, the best developers that were around 5 years ago are also the ones that are using AI the most proficiently now, which, you know, is just kind of ironic.
Yeah. And I think we also have to like understand that like, humans are always going to be like the lazy people and like the more ambitious people. At the end of the day, you're just changing your definition to become a delegator. You're delegating like a large portion of this to an incredibly smart assistant. That's all this is, right? If you hire a new employee that's incredibly talented, you still should be reviewing their work. You should. But like, once you find out that it's this specific task that they can do, like no problems, then yeah, that you can kind of like let them off the leash, things like that.
Yeah, for non-technical work, like, so where do you see this is going? Because Matt obviously talked about the technical side of things, like how, you know, a certain number of people can do this a lot better. For the non-technical stuff, I guess, like, sometimes people do argue, like, for example, oh, accounting, you know, or like, let's say email writing, or contract drafting, or lawyer's work. Those work, the competitive moat of each individual is maybe less than coding. I don't know if that's fair argument. Like, where do you see people like we're just relying on AI in other industries other than tech or other professions?
And so the way I would view it is in like 2 different lenses. One is the fact that I think coding was like the easiest like MVP, like to be able to prove out that like AI can do a lot of things, because coders were the ones that were making the AI, right? So like they kind of have context from both sides of things. Like, for example, in accounting, there's like very specific rules, right? If you're under IFRS, US GAAP, or ASPE, whatever regulations you are, right? So like right now you need to bridge an accountant with like someone that actually understands the technicals of like an LLM so well. And so I think that is like, I guess, still a little bit of a bridge away. In terms of like the most valuable stuff I've seen so far is, again, we have an internal AI now at our company that you can feed it like these like 300-page documents, non-scanned OCR. So I'm just talking about like ones that are like with handwriting, things like that, and it can read through all of it, and it can actually like, give you context, tell you understand where it is. And so, for example, if like I have to read a lot of contracts in my job, right? And the way you try to find specific pages is by you Control F for specific words that you think might hit. Now I can control F for context, right? And I want you to think about how much that changes everything. And that's the same thing, Matt, when you're talking about like, oh, I can understand my code so much better. I can understand my contract so much better because I can just search for context. Like, hey, is there a clause for a right of first refusal, for example, or whatever else there is? Like, and this becomes even more valuable because when you're going into like these multinational companies, that they maybe have a contract in Paraguay, they have one in the United States, completely different languages. And so then the way the clause is framed is also going to be different, like the words that they use and things like that, right? And again, like the only hard part about this is just language, right? And the LLM can kind of, the same way you're talking about, like if it can just access it, it's just data for it. All of it's the same to it.
Wait, which company are you guys using for like to be able to get 300 documents in?
I think you can say.
So we can switch between all the LLMs. So there's like Llama, GPT-4, and
so was this an internal tool that was built within your company, or is it? Oh, okay.
And so like the LLM that's being used is like
oh, fascinating.
Probably Gemini.
No, because my friend, one of our friends from Waterloo is actually working on an AI startup that's basically doing the same thing, but for lawyers, where you can literally pass in like 300 documents at a time. And he was talking to me about all the engineering challenges involved with that. Like, hey, yeah, we'll have like instances where there's like nobody using our servers, and then suddenly we get 300 documents at once, or suddenly we get 1,000 documents, and then they're doing it multiple times. And I'm like, oh my god, like yeah, that's like a really hard like scaling problem. But meanwhile, you have to stay scaled up in the meantime and be like paying that AWS or G Cloud bill. It's like a hard like engineering problem to even build the wrappers,
Oh, that's an interesting one. I never thought of it from that side.
Yeah, speaking of wrappers, like it's like rappers usually get like bad rep. Matt, like rappers usually get rep. Rep like, okay, I'm gonna ask OpenAI to do the same thing you do. Or like, tell me your business idea, I can code it, I can explain your logic in like less than a minute. Things like that. Where do you see this rappers phenomenon? Do you like actually believe in some of those?
Well, I heard an interesting quote from, it was either the CEO of Windsurf or it was the CEO of Cursor, who said the biggest challenge with AI is not feeding it the data, but getting it to focus on the right data, or focus on the right information. And I think that comes a lot from like the prompts and how you're doing prompt engineering. And that comes from a lot of trial and error of figuring out the best prompts. So it's like, what is Windsurf or Cursor at the end of the day? It's a wrapper that they've continually evolved and improved over time, where the prompts come at just the right moment based on the models that they're using. And so it's almost like a finely tuned wrapper that exists around it that like, okay, yeah, you could start from scratch and try to do that, but it's going to take all that trial and error that they've already done. And so like everyone says, oh, all these wrappers are a bubble, but there is like there was prompt engineering work that was done to get to that point. And as new models come out, that's going to have to be done again and again and again. And I feel like that's basically the hardest work that needs to be done from now on, which is like, okay, for lawyers, what are the optimal wrappers? For accountants, what is the optimal wrappers? We already kind of have the optimal wrappers for coders, right? We've got Claude Code, we've got Cursor, we've got Windsurf. Now everyone else needs to catch up.
So where do you see this like? Because what Matt just mentioned, I think makes sense too. But also like an argument could be made. He said, okay, whatever wrapper you're building, isn't it easily replicable? Couldn't like us just like do something similar and just solve those problems and maintain it and just do something the same?
I think people say that about almost anything and everything. Like I remember a couple of years ago, one of my friends even said that about Bitcoin. Right? It's like, oh, like this is just like one step of protocol, right? Yeah, exactly. Can I just create my own version of it? I think the problem becomes there's also a value in the story. There's a value in just like how it looks, how much you get used to the look of it. For example, even with like ChatGPT, like was it Sora, the voice or whatever, their default voice. I got so used to that when I switched to Gemini, it actually kind of bugged me. I had to go back to ChatGPT just for the voice, right? Like it's just a cleaner like talking experience. And so I think that's the point with rappers is, as humans, you get like used to like one certain way of doing things. Nobody really likes change. So even in the case where two products are completely substitutable, we still see like that one product that like people just like made the product market fit with being the one that wins. Like, for example, I think like Uber versus Lyft, like Uber's so much more prominent than like Lyft. I'm sure a big thing into that is like, I also just don't like Uber, me personally. I still hate the look of the Lyft app. It's so disgusting.
Do you think we're going to have like loyalties in the future? Like, I can imagine, dad in the future disciplining his son, like, no, son, we're a ChatGPT family,
I think there definitely has to be a little, I don't know in terms of like you with your kid, but for example, what one is, if all LMs are trying to create context that are decades long, whichever one you start with as a kid is going to be the one you have to kind of continue.
Oh, true, yeah.
Because like what you were just saying is like, you took a while for you to build context, right? For ChatGPT, for like, oh, like write in my voice, this and that. You just can't keep doing that and starting with a brand new LLM.
You're going to have that on a company basis, I think, like where you have like, oh, like this company like primarily uses Gemini. Yeah. And then like, oh, only uses ChatGPT for certain things. And then like, but what I've noticed is it's like for specific things. Like in our company, a lot of the like documents, like legal documents or context documents are all with Gemini, but then everyone like personally uses ChatGPT, but then all, for coding, it's all with Claude. So it's like almost like very like specific LLMs are used for specific use cases almost.
I mean, just like you use LinkedIn for more jobs, use Facebook more for my speed, right? Like I feel like, yeah, different little niches will always get created with like the companies.
I do think habits like a huge thing. A few years ago, I was talking to like a VC and they were talking about like, okay, we're just making an investment in a fintech company that focuses on teens bank accounts and doing like something valuable for teens, because in the US there's no teens bank accounts that was standalone product. Their thing and their thesis, which I don't know today if it's true, proven to be true or not, was like, okay, if we can get a bunch of teens to be using the product, they'll be using it as an adult also, and they will grow up with this bank account and they will be using this account more than their Chase or other bank accounts.
Wasn't that the whole idea with like credit unions to get you in? Like I remember when I was like 13 or 14, like I got my first like credit union account, and I remember sitting there like the lady like literally explained to me like, hey, like you're putting in like your initial like $5 basically towards like the credit union, and now you own like a small portion like of the credit union type thing, right? And it was like there's a whole spiel involved. I remember that, yeah, back in the day. I don't know how prominent credit unions are like in GTA or Toronto, big cities and stuff, but I'm from a small town, so like, people use credit unions. But the problem is like, obviously I couldn't use that forever because, I mean, I grew up and continued using it, but I couldn't use it forever because, that credit union doesn't exist in Toronto, for example. So
right, but that wouldn't be a problem for software because you can access it anywhere.
True. If they supported stable coins, then
yeah. So like, so I guess, yeah, man. Like, what are your thoughts about the future trajectory of AI? Because we've come 2.5 years, I guess, and I always hear people say like, I don't know what's going to happen next in the space, right? As someone who like uses it to code quite a lot, I know like your main area is not AI, but you use a lot of tools. Where do you see it go for like the rest of the year?
Well, I feel like the biggest, like it's just going to keep improving for coders, right? But I see it expanding to more and more like white collar jobs, like it being introduced into law firms, and it being introduced for accountants, it being introduced for, other white collar jobs where, it's just all it takes is someone to create a wrapper that's really effective for it, gain a bunch of users, and then suddenly it's good to go. And so I feel like that's the biggest thing that it's going to expand to. And so are we on the edge of like a bubble about to pop? Like probably not. Is there going to be a bubble at some point in the AI trajectory? Probably. And maybe that happens in like 5 years. Maybe in 3 to 5 years, we have some type of bubble that pops. But then when it comes to looking 25 years in the future, it ends up not being a bubble at all because the bubble pops and then it just goes back to where it was, just like we had with the .com. So, yeah.
So what do you see? Like, so I just read some news about OpenAI's revenue reaching like 10 billion for the past year, which I think is 10
Wow.
Which is super amazing. And I think before that was 2.7 billion or something like that.
Holy moly.
So it grew significantly, but the point is like they're still not profitable even with the 10 billion.
How are they not profitable?
Yes, they're not profitable. Yes, that's my puzzle too. I don't know where they spend that money.
They're just melting the GPUs.
Yeah, they're probably melting GPUs. So like I guess like, so where do you see this go? Is like, do you think that's a forming of a bubble? Because it's like it's such a popular tool. It's the best tool maybe in the history of the internet, and it's still not profitable even after all those years.
Yeah, I think it's to the point where the same way back in like the mid 1990s, it was like these computers where I remember Bill Gates said, "What do I need more than 10 kilobytes for on a computer?" Right? Like I think we're at that kind of stage with GPUs. It's just like as advanced as they are, I don't think they're advanced enough for where we're going in like 10, 15 years. I just think a breakthrough always happens where things like this, the cost just almost go to zero. Like when you have this much value that can, again, like OpenAI is worth 300 billion right now on the secondary markets, right? Like you have this much value and people are, Nvidia is the second most or third most valuable company in the world in the past just 2 years because of the GPUs. When there's this much money in the market, there's just gonna be like some kind of a breakthrough at a point. I think that's just like what the market's waiting for, and all these companies will become profitable. Like all the theses I think in AI have to just come true. It feels at a point when it's very obvious if it smells like a duck, if it walks like a duck, if it talks like a duck, it probably is a duck.
Yeah, I feel like we're in the timeline of AI. We're like in summer of 2012 in the Bitcoin timeline, where in like a year or 2 years, they're going to figure out how to create specialized mining hardware, ASICs, right? Like what, why is no one like, is there an optimization that can be done on the hardware level for LLMs that are way more efficient than GPUs? I feel like probably, right? Like the whole thing with Bitcoin was they needed to optimize around the SHA-256 hashing algorithm. And that's why ASICs like came to fruition. And so what is the things that are going on in the background with LLMs, and can specialized hardware be developed that is way faster and way more efficient at processing? And then that ends up making, OpenAI incredibly profitable.
And one thing I will say is that I feel like we don't talk about enough is, I mean, China proved with DeepSeek that they can kind of do things under constraint, and the amount of restrictions the USA has in terms of GPUs to China. I mean, like, there's just like such an incentive even just for them to be able to create something brand new, and like how they take on this problem.
Yeah, I think that's true. So I feel like we're just gonna wait and see how the space goes. I do feel more confident about coding. Like for someone that's like not always coding, I think I've become more confident at my levels of coding. But I think the problem with me is like I sometimes over rely on AI to solve a few things that I'm not really that interested at. And I think that's potentially a problem. Like my backend developer always tells me that he is skeptical of using a lot of AI in backend development because of the error rate that it's able to produce is actually quite high. And his point, it was like, when you're designing a logic, it's super important to make sure it's a really solid foundational logic when designing a backend system. Whereas sometimes if you rely too much on AI, it's going to have a lot of flaws. And at first I didn't believe it, but then I became more accustomed to that idea. Actually, I'm like, okay, you're right. Yeah.
Well, I feel like the bigger problem is like just giving it enough context from the get-go. Like I agree completely with your backend developer if you're not providing enough context on it, on the way you want it to be developed, right? Because as a developer, you have certain preferences. And so, the AI is just going to go off on a tangent based on what it thinks is the optimal. But if you're able to go and design the system ahead of time and figure out like, oh, hey, I want this, to be engineered in this manner with this architecture because of this, then it's going to be much more effective at putting all those different parts together. And also, if you keep a very keen eye on it, right? If you just run flawed code and it just runs in the background, you're going to end up with a product at the end of the day that's just totally wrong. But if you start it off and literally in the first message that it does, you realize that it's doing the wrong thing and you stop it right there and you say, hey, no, actually, this is what I want. And then you continue and you keep doing that, right? It might be every 4 prompts that you need to modify what it's doing. Then it's going to end up, being on the right track. But like, that's the trade-off, right? Is you can't just be a dormant coder. You need to be actively involved. It's kind of like having a junior developer that like is incredibly good at syntax, right? And that's basically what AI is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think, so.
No, I was just I also think there's like something to be said about like that. What is I was talking about like this idea of just like human like laziness in the sense that you just try to like one shot it or just like in 3-4 prompts. Like if you piecemeal almost anything, whether it's coding or something else, to very, very small little subsets, it's almost always like very accurate. I've seen some good examples of this as well.
What's that meme? It's like the guy like crawling in the desert, and it's like, oh, and this direction is like water. But here and it's like, oh, if you edit this one file, like manually go and edit this one file, or try 20 GPT prompts, and then he goes for that one. You can end up in a loop where it's just stupid. Like you just open the damn file and fix it.
That's very true.
Yeah, and I think we'll close it there. Interesting discussions. So for our listeners, there are many other episodes that we discuss about AI, sovereignty, Bitcoin, and everything related to your 20s and 30s. So feel free to scroll through our episodes and then follow us on Twitter, YouTube, and other platforms. And if you have any ideas about what you want us to discuss, tweet to anyone of us on Twitter or to our Quarter Life Cap on Twitter account. We'll be monitoring 24/7. So thank you.